Hey everybody, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org. They've got a brand new website with new and improved access to more than 20 years worth of essays promoting the cause of liberty. And FFF's writers, including Jacob Hornberger, Jim Bovard, Sheldon Richmond, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and more, aren't just good. They're the best at opposing and discrediting our corrupt overlords in Washington and their warfare, welfare, regulatory police state. That's the Future Freedom Foundation's new and improved site at fff.org.
All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. My website is scotthorton.org. You can find all my interview archives there, more than 2,500 of them now, going back to 2003. And our next guest on the show today is Joe Lauria. Oh, I should say, too, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at /Scott Horton Show. Okay, and now next guest today is Joe Lauria. Writing mostly these days for the Wall Street Journal, correct, Joe?
That's correct, yep.
Right. Okay.
A few websites, yep.
All right, so you just got back from the world tour. Were you in a hot air balloon? How did you get around?
Cabs, and I found there's a universal brotherhood of cab drivers that are not very pleasant to deal with, and trains in India, which is in itself an adventure, and planes, domestic flights in India, and flying between, obviously, the U.S. and Qatar and Doha, and then I went to India, and I came back to Jordan, and then I went on to Egypt.
All
so
right.
It was a lot of planes, trains, walking, cabs, tuk-tuks, just everything but a donkey, although I saw a lot of those and a lot of other animals in India as well that I could have ridden.
Good times. That sounds like quite an adventure. All right, so let's start in the subcontinent there. How did that go?
Well, it was my first visit to India, and I traveled some of the tourist spots, of course, but I also happened to be there. I went to Varanasi, which is the city where people come to bathe in the Ganges, and witnessed firsthand a cremation of a body. That was something I'll never forget. While listening to Ravi Shankar, who had just died while I was there as well, who lived in Varanasi. And then I was in Delhi, and I stayed in a hotel in a place called Malipalpur, which was an old village that's turned into a glitzy, cheap hotel area near the airport. That is the place where the body, still alive, barely, of this woman and her beaten-up boyfriend were dumped out of this bus in a gang rape that has now become extremely well-known around the world. And unfortunately, it's not rare. There are 21 rapes. There's one rape every 21 minutes in Delhi. And while that story broke, I was reading in the Indian press about a 10-year-old girl who was fished out of a canal out in the countryside who had been raped and killed. And in Delhi, around that time, a 3-year-old girl was raped in a kindergarten. So this is a huge, huge problem in India that the authorities had really not paid any attention to, or not enough attention to. And this case has galvanized society and gotten world attention, although as an Indian friend of mine, they're a journalist who's writing for the New York Times now, pointed out at the time that Indians don't care what the world says about these things. Maybe this is an exception because it's made such important news. Because the woman was so brutally beaten that her intestines were pulled out by the bare hands of one of her attackers on a bus that was used during the day as a school bus. Jesus. And these guys got drunk and went on a joyride to look for a woman, and there are all kinds of private, unregulated buses and vehicles that pick people up in India, and this couple came out of a movie, and they went onto this bus, and this horrific attack took place with iron rods. And as I said, they ripped her intestines out, and then they tried to run over her, and the body, half-dead body, and the boy were dumped just right outside where my hotel was, because I didn't know about it. Actually, I wasn't in Delhi when it happened, but I wouldn't have known about it anyway, because it's on the other side of the road.
Great.
It's really put a spotlight on the Indian police, which rarely prosecute or investigate rather these rapes. They don't take rapes seriously enough, and they're extremely ineffective. They were very effective, however, in putting down violently a huge protest that occurred at India Gate in the center of Delhi. Water cannon, batons, mostly women, but men were protesting the ineffectiveness of the police, so they showed how effective they were in using violence against people demonstrating against rape. It was just horrific. They've started a new fast-track court to try to get this through. But just to say, I think the underlying problem in India is, it didn't surprise me that this happened in a way, because I was struck by the enormous amount of men on the streets of all the Indian cities I went in, very few women. And these men are around 10, 12 of them all the time in packs that can become very aggressive. It's something I noticed immediately. So when I heard about this rape, it didn't somehow surprise me. And I think the underlying issues, of course, are vast poverty in India still. And people cannot afford, boys cannot afford to get married. They stay at home until very late into their 20s or older. Same with the women. And it's a traditional society where in villages there still are arranged marriages, of course, and even very wealthy middle-class families, parents, no matter how old the children are, have to approve the marriage. So this kind of society where sex outside of marriage is totally forbidden, creates, and I'm not in any way excusing anything that these guys did, because the vast majority of men in India don't do this. But there's a lot of deep issues about Indian society and frustration of young men and the condoning by the police and the system of this type of rape. So we're hoping that this will change because of this event. But that's really the main horrible issue that happened while I was in India.
So it's really not just, there's oppression of women everywhere kind of thing. It's sort of unique symptoms of this
I think so.
Causes.
I tell you, in Egypt is very well known for sexual harassment, but I think the Egyptian men are gentlemen compared to Indians. The only thing that I saw, and I'm not all Indians, Indian men who were aggressive and harass women incredibly badly. In the subway system, in the metro, they do have separate cars for women. And that's a very good thing. That's the only visible sign I saw of any attention to this problem by the authorities. And I know that women are very happy to be able to go into a car on the subway and not have to be around these packs of men, which surprised me. Now, there's actually almost a parity between men and women in India, so it's not that there's many more men. There are more men, but not by much. I think there's 973 women for every 1,000 men in India. But there is a tendency to keep women at home, and one of the reasons is to protect them from men. And there was a very good photograph that emerged that I saw on my Facebook page where a poster of one of these protesters said mothers and parents should not teach their girls to stay at home, to keep them at home, but to teach their boys how to behave better. I think that's a sentiment that's emerging now, not to blame the victim here, but the victimizers.
Well, now, is this a legacy of the caste system too, or not?
I don't think so. I don't think that could be. I don't know. I mean, maybe someone could make an argument to that. I think it's a legacy of an ongoing traditional society where women are not as valued as men, of course, where baby girls aren't at all wanted in most villages, and boys run the show, and it's just have impunity. And that's what we're hoping changes here, that this behavior that's been tolerated for so long starts to change. And it'll have to start in Delhi and move out. And the government was shocked by the reaction to it. And the police even said, look, we're used mostly to guard VIPs. There's a huge percentage, like 20% of this relatively small 70,000, I think, man police force in a huge city the size of Delhi that is used to protect ambassadors and dignitaries and whatnot arriving in and out of Delhi, and that there was a call in the Times of India for a separate complete force to be created to do that and to let police do work like prosecuting rape. So this is shaking up India quite a lot. I don't know if it will, again, the underlying problem is poverty and this traditional way of relation between men and women that is causing this, one of the causes, I think, although there's no excuse for this aggressive, outrageous behavior, because there are other societies that have traditional like that, including Egypt, and we don't see rape on this scale and this kind of impunity.
All right, so speaking of Egypt, let's speak of Egypt. Big doings going on there. They ratified their constitution, I think by pretty good majorities, but then again, there's a lot of dissension, too. How much time did you spend there, and what else can you tell us to update us on the situation of the domestic politics
I was
there?
about 10 days in Cairo, and it seemed a lot calmer than the last time we spoke, when I spoke from near Tahrir Square. If you remember, we had an interview.
The roaring crowd in the background.
Yeah, and there was a lot of agitated people cheering, of course, celebrating, but also fights in the street and things like that. So things have noticeably calmed down. There's less chaos. There were no police in the streets. And when I went back again in July 2011, this is my third trip since the overthrow of Mubarak, things were completely chaotic that time because there were no police. So people were just literally getting out of their car and walking away, parking it in the middle of the street. There was no one there. So that's all changed. There's a bit of order now. And compared to India, Egypt is like Berlin when it comes to the street and the way people drive and whatnot. So the issue is really what's coming up now are two big events in Egypt. January 25th is the second-year anniversary of the beginning of the revolt. And the Egyptian mission to the UN is having, of course, now being run by the Muslim Brothers, is having a party for journalists and dignitaries and diplomats to celebrate this. But the activists that I spoke to in Cairo are saying that there's going to be another uprising, there'll be another revolution, and that they hope it won't be as bloody as the first one. There's a lot of anger against the Muslim Brothers for numerous reasons. One is they have thugs in the street. In fact, the night that I arrived, someone was shot in Cairo Square, and my hotel was right nearby. I didn't know about it. So they sent their thugs when there was a sit-in in front of the presidential palace. When President Mohammed Morsi took dictatorial powers before the vote on the Constitution. There's a lot of anger about the actual voting in that constitutional referendum, widespread allegations of fraud, ballot stuffing, that sort of thing. There's a lot of fears about what kind of society is going to be brought about by the Muslim Brothers. In the casinos where no Egyptians are allowed, but mostly only Gulf Arabs are gambling. I happened to go there because I had a friend from Qatar invited me, so it was quite a scene. I don't play myself, but I watched this scene of guys throwing away $1,000 chips like they were pennies. And there was fears in the casinos they would be shut down or that bars would be shut down. But there's a hell of a lot of money, especially in the casinos, for the government. So I think the one word you could say, a couple of words you could say about the Muslim Brothers is deception and hypocrisy. And I doubt that they will shut down the casinos. And when there's money, they're huge capitalists. And that's why they've been great allies of the West, going back from when they were created in 1928 with the British acquiescence. The British used the Muslim Brothers to fight left-wing opponents to King Farouk, their puppet king. They fought against left-wing students. They tried to kill Nasser when he came to power, and even though he was no communist. So they were certainly used by the West against Russia and the Soviet Union interests, as the West used many Islamist groups, and of course famously in Afghanistan in the 80s, in Iran in 54 to overthrow the Shah, and elsewhere. This has been one of the instruments of the West, the Muslim Brothers. So now they're in power, and I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing for the West and the United States. The only thing that may be concerned about is the Camp David Accord with Israel. But despite the rhetoric, I don't think that Morsi and the Muslim Brothers will do anything about that. So I think that is safe, the Camp David Accord diplomatic relations with Israel. So I think the anger may explode again on the 25th of January, and then in April is the parliamentary elections. And this is where you have to put some blame on the opposition, although it's a function of the fact that they are actually a democratic group or groupings rather than the Muslim Brothers are kind of a religious totalitarian system. So you've got so many different liberal, secular, democratic groups that were fighting each other. They didn't organize in the first parliamentary election. Certainly they took too long to decide whether to tell their supporters to boycott or vote in the constitutional referendum virtually a few days before. And there was they did say to vote for the Constitution. It lost. It won in Cairo. I mean, it was rejected in Cairo, but not in the rest of the country. This is really where the base of the Muslim Brotherhood is, out in villages where, of course, they give a lot of social assistance, and they are enormously well organized to bring people to the polls. And they tell them that if you don't vote for us, you're not voting for God. So this kind of support gave the Muslim Brothers and their Salafist allies this 70% majority in that first parliamentary election and got this constitution approved, even though at the time of Mubarak's overthrow, everybody I spoke to, all the experts were saying they couldn't get more than 30%. So they got a hell of a lot more, and you got to blame the democratic secular opposition for that because of their lack of organization, their lack of getting people out to the polls. This will be the key in this coming election in April, these parliamentary elections. The opposition staying united. They've created a new united front now. We'll see whether that stays together, whether they can get candidates that are appealing and most importantly, get people to the polls, especially in Cairo, where a quarter of the 80 million people of Egypt live. If they can win overwhelmingly there, and somehow get some support out in the countryside, they could maybe arrest the majority in Parliament, which would make a very interesting scenario of a Muslim Brotherhood president and a democratic secular opposition in Parliament. But things are, going to heat up again there, and the 25th of January could bring more violence again. And there's right now in Tahrir Square that I could see from my balcony, the same one I spoke to you from, an encampment of anti-Morsi protesters. They're being allowed to stay there now. I don't know for how long. And it's causing some traffic problems, of course, around the square. But it's a symbol that the Morsi government is, even though it was elected, and there's some question about how free those elections were and fair, they're in power, and we're going to see maybe a confrontation on the 25th of January.
Mm-hmm. All right, now, so the Constitution itself, is it really that bad? In the sense that, did the Muslim Brotherhood miscalculate here, and they wrote a Constitution that's so exclusive and protects their power so obviously that really they were, in a sense, asking for the left to want to just boycott it and opt out and protest rather than figured that they could move forward under the new Constitution? Or maybe that's what they wanted, to go ahead and have a new fight about this and then win even better later.
Well, I don't know exactly whether they thought whether they would have welcomed the boycott. Obviously, whether they counted on the boycott. Certainly a boycott would have meant the thing would have passed more easily. But I think that they were able to calculate, based on the support Morsi got in the presidential election and the mood of the country and the great organizational skills that they have, that they were going to get this Constitution passed. And it was the way it was put together that's the real issue. There was very little input allowed by women groups, by Christians, by youth, and to the point where they boycotted the Constitutional Assembly and they didn't take part in the end. Now, it had to be pretty bad for them to drop out because you need that input. But again, the Muslim Brothers are so clever that it's very hard to read them. They're enormous opportunists. They supported Mubarak until the very end. There were some individual Muslim brothers who were in the square leading to the overthrow of Mubarak, but it was only until it was clear that he was going to go that they jumped on board. And then they said they would not run a presidential candidate. And of course, it was just a lie because they did, and the guy's president now. So this Constitution, if you look at it, and I haven't studied it that deeply, it is very deceptive. And even the opponents say that it's hard to say, that this is going to become a complete transformation to a religious or a theocracy. But there are elements in the Constitution that allow for changes down the road that could lead to a more Islamic society. I think that's the consensus. That's what the intent is. And the fact is, a huge number of people in Egypt do not want an Islamist society. They will accept people living the way they want to, if they want to live in that way, but they don't want it imposed on a country that, don't forget, had in the 20s and 30s, a huge secular and progressive society by Arab nation standards. They had elections, they had newspapers in the 20s and 30s, and they had left-wing organizations, and they had women flying planes in the 20s and not wearing hijab early on, so from the 1918 revolution. So, they just don't want to see this going backward, and they've got to get their act together in the democratic secular side to prevent a parliament that in April that will be run by Islamists. And there's also the influence of the Gulf states in that country. And the Qatars come under some heat because they've just given another $2 billion to the Egyptians to help them with the economy, which I should point out is really where Morsi is vulnerable. I had one of these cab drivers that I was complaining about earlier trying to tell me he was overcharging me so much because Morsi's so bad at the economy. I told him that I wasn't a fan of Morsi, but don't blame him for you trying to cheat me. But the widespread insecurity and anxiety about the economy, it was never great to begin with, and tourism has not rebounded that much from the time of the revolution. So this is really where he's weak. If he doesn't come through 6 months to a year, and some people are already complaining that he had enough times, then I think the opposition has to make that their cry, that they could have a better economic policy. And, of course, the IMF is hanging around. They just had a meeting last week, and they're going to demand their pound of flesh from the poor as they always do. And somehow the Muslim Brothers, are going to have to take this money, but they're trying to avoid the extra pain that will inflict on the poor because that will hurt them. And there's one story I can tell you about that I heard in one part of Cairo where there women on a bus in a poor part of Cairo were complaining that the bus fare had risen 25 piastres from £1 up to £1. And £1, you need 6 pounds is $1. So if you're talking about £1 is like 25, less than like $20.20, less than that. And it was risen about 1 or 2 cents, the bus fare. And they were complaining and moaning on the bus. Covered women as well. Women who might presumably have been Morsi supporters. They're not happy that they have to pay 1 or 2 cents more for the bus, which is a heck of a lot of money for them. So this is where he's very, very vulnerable right now.
Well, this is what caused the revolution in the first place. It was one big bread riot because of the price inflation.
Yeah, that was sparked, but of course there were people fed up with torture.
Oh, of course, yeah. No, I don't mean to sell that.
And by the way, there's now allegations that there's torture going on the Morsi, which are not surprising, and there's cronyism. So, do they want another Mubarak with religious clothing on? I don't think so. But again, they have this huge support in the countryside, and there's a really terrible possibility of more violence between these two very determined groups. And that could happen again on the 25th.
So, Joe, at the time when Mubarak was falling, you talk about how the Muslim Brotherhood didn't really pose until the very end. Same thing, of course, with the Democrats. And the New York Times was even running a story right at, I think, the eve of his fall, that Hillary Clinton's position is, well, if we can't have Mubarak, we want Omar Suleiman, the head of the secret torture police, because he's always been real loyal to us, on the rendition program and everything. So no problem as long as we can keep him. But now I'm thinking that maybe the lady doth protest too much, and that really what she was saying was, we'll be perfectly fine with the Muslim Brotherhood. Our guys have worked with them for, since the British handed them off to us back generations ago, and so we can work things out with them. And they can have a regime change, but they're not going to get independence from us.
Right. Well, it's the Marcos Shah syndrome. They held on to Marcos and the Shah to the very end, despite their vast human rights abuses and corruption. And once they see the people are going to overthrow it, then they dump the guy. So it's very much like the Muslim Brothers. That's right. And Suleiman, who's now dead, would have been horrific because he was the head of the intelligence. He had very good relations with Israeli intelligence, apparently. So. And he was safe for American interests, which is all they obviously care about there and anywhere else in the world. They don't care about Islam or, unfortunately, that much about human rights, unless it's somebody they want to see out, like Assad or the Iranians. And then human rights, and not to say those countries are not human rights abusers, but that's when it becomes an issue for the United States. When it's an opponent or an enemy that they highlight human rights abuses, and they don't do it for people that they are dealing with, and the Muslim Brothers are dealing with. So, Obama may make statements that they want to see pluralism, and they should make more statements like that and apply more pressure if they really, going to back up the rhetoric of wanting to spread democracy. It's the same old story, Scott, you've been talking about, I'm sure, ever since 2003, your first of 2,500 shows, whatever. Same old American foreign policy we've seen for years, very short-sighted, short-termed, using extremists if necessary, and then when there's a common enemy, and then some of those extremists turn their anger against the U.S., and there's still a lot of anti-American, anti-Western feeling, obviously, at the root of the Muslim Brothers. But I think as long as Morsi's in there, he's going to play ball internationally, and he can make a lot of rhetoric about Israel and Hamas and all that. But I don't see him breaking off relations there. He's going to Iran again the next couple of days. That kind of worries the West, but I don't think too much. He needs money, and he's getting it from the Gulf, mostly from the Qataris now and from the Saudis, and that's fine with the Americans because they've been supporting Saudi religious dictatorship for a very long time now. It's a perfect example, again, of American foreign policy, not really caring too much about how rulers behave as long as they play the game and they're on the American side.
Right. Well, yeah, and so speaking of which, tell us about Jordan, and specifically, what's it got to do with the Arab Spring?
Well, Jordan is starting to bubble up more and more. There have been protests significantly by the East Bank tribes, which are Jordanians that go way back there. They're not Palestinians. As you know, the majority population in Jordan are Palestinians who came there since 1947. And if the king allowed a elected parliament, there would most certainly be a parliamentary majority and a prime minister who was a Palestinian. And that would not be something that those East Bank tribes would want, nor the king would want. And the demands for a constitutional monarchy by them would grow. For the most part, they don't want to overthrow King Abdullah. It's more a demand for constitutional monarchy, but that would weaken tremendously his authority and particularly the strength, his support in these East Bank Jordanian tribes, who would certainly be the losers if there were ever a really elected parliament. So that's, again, still the point. And there's also an Islamist movement there that's troubling to the king as well. And that whether they're being supported by the Gulf is not to the extent, certainly in Egypt, but the king is trying to sort of make good relations with the Gulf Arabs, with the GCC, to the point where the GCC has offered and they've accepted, although I don't know if it's ever going to happen, to become a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council, even though Jordan is very far from the Arab or Persian Gulf. So there's really kind of a league of monarchs that is being developed. Morocco also was invited to join that. A league of monarchs against democracy, essentially, which is what they do not want to see anywhere. And in Egypt, if there's going to be a democracy and there was an election, they did whatever they could in terms of money and organization to help their guys win, and the guy did win. So the Muslim Brothers have power in Egypt very much, and the Salafists have a lot of seats in parliament, or did before it was canceled. Very much so because of Saudi, Qatari, and Kuwaiti money. And Jordan, I think, it was very calm there. I didn't see any protests, but I've read about them. But I know that that's the political situation there, and there have been now protests from these eastern tribes against the king, criticizing him, and that's really dangerous for him because he depends on their strength and their support, and some of them, are not pleased by the way he's handling the situation in terms of the protests from Palestinians and Islamists. So Jordan is in the back burner. They have a huge problem now with Syrian refugees. There are, I think, 300, 1,000 or more, and there's more coming over the border. And there was a riot the other day in one of these camps. There were flooding of their tents, and they rioted against the humanitarian workers. So it's a horrible situation. I saw some Syrian refugees on the highway next to the Dead Sea as I drove down to Aqaba. So they've gone as far down as that, living right along the side of the road. This is as it is in Turkey as well, a really dangerous situation in terms of the amount of money that has to be spent and the feelings of the Syrian refugees and how long they could stay in that situation before it causes more problems. So Abdullah has his hands full right now. But he can count on the United States and British support without any question.
Right. Now, and it's a complicated thing. I think one of the things you mentioned there is about there's so many Palestinians in the country. They're almost the majority now, right? The refugees?
They are a majority.
And so that kind of creates a lot of support for the monarchy there, because at least it's not putting the foreigners in charge if they have a real majority.
Right.
And they're really considered foreigners.
Powerful tribes in the east bank of the Jordan River want to make sure the Palestinians don't gain any kind of power in a constitutional monarchy. So we will most likely see this absolute monarchy continue, but there's a lot of pressure coming from Jordanians, mostly Palestinians, who want to see that changed. But nothing's really boiling over at the moment. But it doesn't make a lot of news, but there is trouble there. No question about it.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, I guess we'll have to see what happens, especially, I guess, when, there's reports of the Americans training the Free Syrian Army there and this and that, and you got that whole problem not far away could have a lot of blowback, right?
Oh, absolutely. Again, the Americans, have no problems dealing with Jordan. They have good relations, Obama and Abdullah, personal relations, and he's allowed them to train, as you say, on their territory. And if you go back to 1980, there was another revolution in Syria that people forget about, and that was supported by Israel and Jordan, and it was the Muslim Brothers to try to overthrow Hafez Assad, Bashir Assad's father, and he crushed it mercilessly, I should say, and that was the very famous Hama massacre of God knows how many people, 80,000, maybe more, that kind of crushed it. And he basically leveled part of that town where the Muslim Brotherhood stronghold was. Now, this is forgotten, but today we're seeing, again, a Muslim Brotherhood-led, Islamist-led, but not exclusively, with this Nursi Front, this very Islamist extremist Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group, which is they're doing the best fighting for the rebels that the Americans are having conundrums over because they want to support the rebels, but they don't want to seem to be supporting these guys. And this time it's obviously having a lot more success than that 1980 uprising. And Syria, Brahimi went there, Dr. Brahimi, the UN and Arab League mediator, went and saw Bashar al-Assad and looked like they might have revived this Geneva Accord of last year, which the Russians and the Americans and everybody else agreed to. But that fell apart pretty quickly. The rebels don't want to give up fighting. And the only reason why I think Assad was kind of interested is because there's a lot of pressure now on his regime. But he's still pretty strong, and he's got a large army still, and he made this speech in which he had a lot of support in that opera hall. But unfortunately, he did not say he would leave. And that's the only thing that might get the rebels to go to the national conference that he also called for. But if he stays in power, there's no way they're going to go to a national conference. If he were to leave and keep some of his own people there and then take part in this, slight chance there could be a negotiated settlement. But he's not going, so there's no chance, and there's a fight to the finish, and it's going to keep getting worse until they either overthrow him or he crushes it, or both sides realize at some point that they're at a stalemate, and neither side will win, and they have to talk now because the country's just being bled to death, and it's being ripped apart. And the suffering, might become apparent to them as being futile. While either side thinks they could win, they seem to be very tolerant of mass suffering and casualties. But if it ever dawns on both of them that neither side can win, there may have to be some solution. But that may never happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, David Anderson...
The war in Lebanon went on 15 years, yep.
David Anderson McClatchy was quoting one of these rebels, I think a former rebel who was taking a break or something. But he was saying what they're envisioning is Syria broken up into at least, the Sunni Arab half or more territory would be broken up into these little emirates like in the Gulf and, of course, controlled by the Saudis and Qataris.
Well, my friend and colleague at the UN, Neil McFarquhar of the New York Times, wrote an interesting piece a couple of weeks ago about that area, Latakia, and that area near Turkey on the coast where the very stronghold of the Alawites, and many are moving to their summer homes this winter and maybe not going back. There's an exodus there, and there's a lot of talk that this could happen, that there could be a breakaway province there as its own country. The very area the French wanted to create as an Alawite, and did create as an Alawite enclave, independent from the rest of Syria, in the 1920s, although they weren't very happy about it and they resisted it. But this has happened before. It could happen again. But, I don't know whether the rebels, if they got strong enough, would go and attack them. There's such a feeling of wanting revenge against Assad and his clan and the Alawites that I don't know whether they'd be, if they won and they took power in Damascus, whether they would be pleased to have them having their own little state there where they could regroup and cause problems. So that's just talk right now about breaking Syria up. But it's possible. They talked about breaking up Iraq. You remember that? Into 3 parts?
Yeah, well, and I mean, it sounds like they've kind of succeeded in doing that, really. I mean, Maliki's government doesn't really control the Anbar province, right? That's where all these fighters are coming from that are doing the fighting in Syria now.
Yeah, with Saudi support, a lot of it in Iraq. And you're right, they're going across the border into Syria.
And that was one of the things, I'm not necessarily taking it that serious, but as a possible future, I remember, half a year ago or something, some of these guys saying, well, yeah, why not just, break up Syria and take the Sunni parts of it and merge them with the Sunni parts of Iraq? That's a more natural kind of place anyway.
Yeah, but no, we're forgetting the Kurds. That's a really big player in this because they've been fighting against some of the Sunni militants. They see this as an opportunity to create a Kurdish state if Syria breaks up. That's not something Turkey will tolerate, obviously. So that comes into play. Even though
nor Maliki either, right? The Shiite regime in Baghdad.
No. Yeah, well, they have autonomy in the north of Iraq, but they have an arrangement with Turkey, and it's working somehow. But if it happened in Syria, that would be something volcanic maybe in the region. If Kurds got a separate state, I don't think they'd allow that, the West either, and the Turks certainly wouldn't allow that. So you'd see probably the Sunni militants fighting to stop that with support from Turkey and the West and the Gulf, probably. So, this idea of breaking Syria up is an idea. And right now, all we're seeing is bloodshed, and there doesn't seem to be anything else on the horizon right now.
Well, I mean, it seems more plausible than the rebels sacking Damascus and driving Assad from power, right?
I don't know. Right now, that doesn't seem realistic, but they're attacking air bases nearby. They're grabbing villages. There's a big base apparently north of Damascus on the road to Turkey that is really key to Assad's defense, because if he lost that base, there might be an open road down from Turkey for more arms, ammunition, money, whatever to come through without unhindered. That could be the war could be won or lost over that base in the north of Damascus on the road to Turkey. And again, if they can get more arms and ammunition in there, these guys are getting better, the rebels. There's no question about it. They've also taken over, as you saw a couple of months ago. Some people thought that would turn the tide, but it hasn't. They took over a lot of bases. Apparently the Syrian army guys fled. And they grabbed tanks and anti-aircraft weapons, and there's some heavy equipment, so that they're much better armed because they're taking over a few bases and stealing these arms. Now, whether they can get ammunition for them or not, I haven't seen where they've made the big difference. At first, they did make a difference, but that seems to have lessened. So more of that could happen where bases are taken over, arms are taken. The Syrian government's worried that the rebels will take chemical weapons and use it, and there's no evidence yet that the Syrians would ever use chemical weapons, but if it comes right down to the end and they're encircled in Damascus, who knows, which could bring Western intervention directly. But there's all these scenarios out there, and nobody knows which one is going to play out. The only thing we're certain of, again, is that the fighting is intensifying and the suffering is as well.
Yeah. You know, one more thing about that David Enders piece is he quotes somebody from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy saying, well, Obama dithered so long in supporting the good guy rebels that now we have to accept the fact that it's al-Qaeda guys fighting this war for us. But then, after they're done winning the war, then we'll have the room to move in there and start supporting the good guy rebels extra and marginalize the bad guy rebels. That's their plan, and they're sticking with it, apparently.
That sounds like a pipe dream to me. First of all, there were extremists in this from the very, very beginning. Even at the time of the peaceful demonstrations, there were armed guys and armed attacks, not on a big scale, obviously. So the idea that the extremists only came in because the U.S. didn't support Sunni rebels who were not so extremist is not true. And second of all, I think there is a possibility that there could be another civil war if Assad is overthrown, as we saw in Afghanistan, when the Soviets were overthrown, and then we had the long civil war bringing the Taliban eventually to power, and that some elements of the Sunnis who don't like the extremists might fight them, as well as Kurds fighting for their state. But they might be, they seem to, the articles that I read, are that a lot of the Sunni rebels are pleased with these extremist groups, these al-Qaeda groups, because they're doing such a good job. They're the ones blowing up cars in front of ministry buildings inside Damascus. They're the ones
in schools
who are going to go in there and do these kinds of dirty jobs that the rebels are not trained for or are not inclined to do. So if they win, because of them, Assad is overthrown, they might very well, be incorporated into, who knows? They're not really known for governing, so I don't know what's going to emerge. But the idea that they could just marginalize them, I don't know if that's possible. Again, that's just, talk right now, and anybody can engage in that.
All right, well, we're way over time here. I need to let you go, but I appreciate your time. It's always great to talk to you.
I appreciate talking to you again, Scott.
Very
good.
Take care. Everybody, that's the great Joe Lauria. He's reporting on world events for the Wall Street Journal.
Man, you need some Liberty stickers for the back of your truck. At LibertyStickers.com, they've got great state hate, like Pearl Harbor was an inside job. The Democrats want your guns. U.S. Army, die for Israel. Police brutality, not just for black people anymore. And government school, why you and your kids are so stupid. Check out these and 1,000 other great ones at LibertyStickers.com. And of course, they'll take care of all your custom printing for your band or your business at TheBumperSticker.com. That's LibertyStickers.com. Everyone else's stickers suck. Hey, y'all, Scott here. First of all, thanks to the show's sponsors and donors who make it possible for me to do this. Secondly, I need more sponsors and more donors if the show is to continue. ScottHorton.org/donate has all the links to use PayPal, Give.org, Google Wallet, WePay.com, and even Bitcoins to make a donation in any amount. You can also sign up for monthly donations of small and medium-sized amounts through PayPal and Give.org. Again, that's ScottHorton.org/donate for all the links. To advertise on the site or the show, email me, Scott@ScottHorton.org. And thanks. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here, inviting you to check out WallStreetWindow.com. It's a financial blog written by former hedge fund manager Mike Swanson, who's investing in commodities, mining stocks, and European markets. Wall Street Window is unique in that Mike shows people what he's really investing in and updates you when he buys or sells in his main account. Mike thinks his positions are going to go up because of all the money the Federal Reserve is printing to finance the deficit. See what happens at WallStreetWindow.com. And Mike's got a great new book coming out, so also keep your eye on writerMichaelSwanson.com for more details. Hey ladies, Scott Horton here. If you would like truly youthful, healthy, and healthy-looking skin, there is one very special company you need to visit, Dagny & Lane at DagnyandLane.com. Dagny & Lane has revolutionized the industry with a full line of products made from organic and all-natural ingredients that penetrate deeply with nutrient-rich ionic minerals and antioxidants for healthy and beautiful skin. That's Dagny & Lane at DagnyandLane.com. And for a limited time, add promo code SCOTT15 at checkout for a 15% discount. The Emergency Committee for Israel, Brookings, Heritage, AIPAC, WINEP, JINSA, PNAC, CNAS, the AEI, FPI, CFR, and CSP. It sure does seem sometimes like the war party's got the foreign policy debate in D.C. all locked up. But not quite. Check out the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. They put America first, opposing our government's world empire, and especially their Middle Eastern madness. That's the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org.